I'm going to do a question and answers if possible, and if possible, Minister, could just be brief, although obviously some of the questions recorded more substance than others. It wasn't my intention to go back onto the calculated grades, but it's very difficult to remove yourself from it also. I was struck in your opening remarks when you mentioned the fact that the estimated mark a student will receive is informed by a teacher's professional judgment, and available evidence can be used to support the estimation of a mark. Once a teacher has completed the stage of establishing an estimated mark for each student, those marks are then considered as part of a school alignment process. Minister, I absolutely trust teachers. I think I've spent a lot of time in desk skills, and anyone that enters that profession deserves far more than we could ever pay or place value on them. But the school alignment process, I have massive issues with, as we've already discussed. And let me give you some of the evidence that may just be used. And apologies for being parochial, but I am going to use schools in my own constituency again on this. The school that you referenced last week, Larkin College, an absolutely wonderful school. If you take their progression rates to university in the last couple of years, so 2019, 59%, 2018, 35%, 2017, 25%, there's a very significant upward trajectory there. If you take, and that's actually reflected across a lot of desk skills, you see in the last couple of years there's been various different innovations and they've progressed upwards. Take the private school in my area, for example. Since 2010, there's only been 2 years where progression rates hasn't been 100%, and on those 2 years it was 99%, or 96% and 89%. So tell me about that skill alignment process with that factors being considered.
You raised that school again, and I'm glad that I raised it last week as well, because I have great memories of going in there, and they're really involved in the PTEC project. And it was an aside conversation with one of the teachers, and she was telling me about that progression, and she was talking about the progression not just to university but to further education and training, apprenticeship, and they're doing it year on year. And I've made it quite clear to my officials that all the investment that we're putting into disadvantaged schools and into desk schools, it's to work on that progression. So as there's a year-to-year progression in terms of those schools moving and having stronger classes than the previous year, this goes back to the school alignment, because the school, whether it's a geography teacher in Larkin College or whether it's a maths teacher in my old school in Milford, they will sit down with their colleagues in that school. They will have guidelines and procedure to work through and follow through as from tomorrow, and then there will be an alignment with the principal, and there will be an engagement in looking at the progression of those individual students. And I think it's a good point, and I'm glad you raised it publicly here tonight, that if schools are making year-to-year progression, they should not be disadvantaged in any way. And there's other examples in other schools. For example, a school who has introduced honours maths this year for the first time, so they've no way of comparable evidence. So it's the year itself, it's the school alignment, and it's the school results that are key here.
Still a little bit confused as to how that would be taken in with the alignment process, but I'm just going to continue if that's okay. One of the big inequalities that exists in education is overcrowding in classrooms. I mean, on average, Irish students have, I think it's 26 students per classroom in Ireland. It's one of the EU higher averages in the EU. I think 1 in 5 students in Ireland are in classrooms of, 1 in 5 students go to classrooms of 30 students or more. In fact, not to be parochial, I think in your own constituency, that's actually some of the highest classroom to students ratios in the country. At any time that's unfair, under a public health crisis, that's actually dangerous. So what does education look like? How can we confront the oversizes in classrooms, given the fact that COVID-19 is going to mean that oversized classrooms where you have 30 students to one teacher, including an SNA teacher, that's actually just dangerous. It's not going to happen. What is the department going to do about that coming into September?
I think that's the piece of work that we're engaged at the moment. The secondary, the post-primary stakeholders have asked to make a submission. The majority of them have already done that. So those submissions, those queries as to what school will look like in September under current health guidelines, and the current health guidelines at the moment from NEFID is 2 metres, and that doesn't give you 30 in the class. It also looks at ways of how do we How do we make that classroom work? How do we make it work for the students? How do we make it work from a learning point of view as well? How do we make it work for students with special educational needs? How do we make it work with the SNAs who are in that class as well? How do we make it work in terms of the need for hand sanitizers, ensuring that the schools are cleaned in advance and potentially on a daily basis? So you're talking about extra cost, you're talking about potentially extra resources. So that's what we're working through at the moment, but we're going to get a roadmap on that at an earliest opportunity as possible.
We've talked about the fact that this year's six-year cohort have had an experience unlike any other. Arguably, the class of 2021 is going to have a more unfair experience than any other. If you think about this year's fifth-year cohort, they've lost a substantial amount of their fifth year. They're coming into an entirely new world in sixth year, where we're talking about, we actually don't know what we're talking about now. What is the plan for the fifth-year cohort going into sixth year? And can we do that quickly to ensure that the anxiety, the stress that we've seen in this year's sixth year, we're not just passing on to the fifth-year cohort? What's the plan for that cohort, and when will we see it in actual detail? Thank you.
We've identified, and I would like to thank all the deputies in this House who have raised the issue of fifth years, and obviously we get individual contact from them as well. But the class of 2021 is something that we need to ensure that whatever support we can give, because of their lost class time, and September, with all the challenges that's going to be ahead of us, that in terms of priority, we will prioritise them. We will put support systems in place to ensure that whatever time or parts of the curriculum that they've lost, we're going to work with them to make up lost time. But the detail of that is not a finished piece, because we have to ensure what collectively schools will look like, so we're not in a position to do that. But I know from my contact and communication with the stakeholders that that is a piece of work that we're going to continue to focus on.
I'd argue that's a vital piece of work that we really need to see probably before the break of the summer. Guidance counselling, career guidance counselling, which actually becomes emotional support in most schools, is an absolute vital function. For the longest period of time, it's been completely underfunded, and I'd argue underappreciated. When it was talk of we are going to continue to leave cert and we're going to bring students back for 2 weeks beforehand, I think anyone that's been in an education setting recognises that the majority of those 2 weeks would be spent providing emotional support to students. Is there a plan to increase guidance counselling hours next year? And I'll just give it in terms of, in the free education scheme, there's only 48 hours per week for schools with over 1,000 plus students, and a mere 8 hours for schools with 200 or less students. And not to be hyperbolic about it, but that works out at about 2.24 minutes per each student in career guidance each week, which is actual emotional support. Can we place more emphasis on that this year?
Yeah, look, I had a brief prepared for me from the National Education Psychological Service, so that is something that we're going to be prepared for when schools go back in September as well, and whatever resources. But a lot of the decisions or a lot of the suggestions made here tonight, be it in relation to pupil-teacher ratio, extra support for guidance counsellors, a lot of it's budgetary. And if there's changes to be made in relation to budgetary decisions for any individual department, obviously these are decisions that are going to have to be made by a government with the proper governmental powers as well, in terms of whether it's financial decisions to make that happen. And one of the things that the department has been very clear with me in terms of the financial projections going forward, there's going to be a lot of extra money needed in a variety of areas to ensure that we have a sustainable educational model going forward.
Very briefly, and I'll finish on this point, Corla. One of those extra additions of money is actually just going to be for the skill book scheme. I mean, a lot of conversation was happening around the digital divide and the quest to get iPads and laptops into students' hands. What also happened over the last couple of months is schools gave students out their books, and a lot of those books are not going to be coming back. So we need to look at how we can invest in getting some of those books back in school. It's going to require investment. Minister, I want to finish on this point. I mentioned last week the requirement and the need, and I'd argue I want to be constructive in my engagement with the department. I think there's a real opportunity for everyone in this chamber to work towards a common goal in terms of education. We cannot wait until a government won't be formed, if it's formed, until probably closer to July. A lot's happening quickly. I suggest we should have some form of an education committee that we can get around the table almost on a weekly basis, where we can discuss these issues and help each other out. I think there is a space for that. It's a rare opportunity that across the divide we get to have a shared goal, and I think that's something that we can do a little bit better, although your department and your staff have been very accommodating when we ring them up and ask questions.
Thank you.